Today's story is about a lady called Naomi and a lady called Ruth. This story is in the old part of the Bible. This is the Old Testament before Jesus was born. Naomi lived in a town called Bethlehem, which was in Israel. Naomi was an Israelite and she lived there with her husband, and they had 2 sons. Whilst they were living there, it became a very difficult time because there was something called a famine, which means they'd run out of food. And so Naomi and her husband and her 2 sons went to live in a different town where they could find food. And they settled there. It was called Moab. They were very happy in Moab, and they had a nice place to live and they had food to eat. During their time there, Naomi's 2 sons grew up and they met and married their wives. One son was married to Ruth and the other son was married to Orpah. As time went by, sadly, Naomi's husband died, and so did her 2 sons, which meant this left Ruth, Orpah and Naomi to live together. Now, in the old days, usually you would have a man that would take care of you. But very sadly, Naomi didn't have any relatives living in Moab to look after her. And Orpah and Ruth could go back and live with their families, with their fathers and their mothers. And so Naomi said to Orpah and to Ruth that she must go back and live in Bethlehem. This made Orpah and Ruth very sad, and they didn't want to say goodbye. So they started to make the journey to Bethlehem to keep Naomi company. They all set off along the road. As they were travelling, Naomi decided it was time that Orpah and Ruth should return back to Moab. So she said goodbye to them, and she said that she would miss them. Orpah loved Naomi very much and gave her a hug and then said goodbye, and was very sad as she went off back to Moab. Ruth said to Naomi, "I really do not want to leave you. I want to come and live with you. I want to come and find out more about the God that you love and follow and have him as my God." And so Naomi said that she was very, very welcome. And so Naomi and Ruth made the rest of the journey all the way back to Bethlehem. And when they reached Bethlehem, they had to find somewhere to stay. And they didn't have any family or anyone to take care of them. So they found shelter. Now, in Bethlehem, they had a rule, which was that farmers who had land and fields and food to eat would allow people that didn't have anything, people who were poor, to come and gather the leftover grain that the workers had left behind. And so every day Ruth went out and she found all of the grain that she could find in the farmers' fields, and she worked really, really hard collecting grain all day long to take back to Naomi. Naomi was quite old by this time, and it would be too difficult for Naomi to come and do this work. And so every day Ruth went out and she gathered the grain, she took it back to Naomi, and they had enough food to eat each day. And then the next day, Ruth would go back out again into the fields, and she'd work so hard in the hot sun. and she would bring back food every day for her and Naomi to eat. Ruth was doing an amazing thing to help to look after Naomi. The farmer, who was called Boaz, spotted Ruth every single day, and he came out to see her and to find out about who she was. He told Ruth how amazed he was that she did this every single day to help Naomi. Boaz told Ruth that whilst she was in his field, she could collect as much grain as she needed. And he also said that she could drink from the water that he had for his workers so that she didn't get too hot in the sun. Ruth collected the grain as usual and took it back to Naomi. And when she explained how she had met this kind man called Boaz, Naomi said that Boaz was actually an old relative of theirs and that maybe he would agree to look after them. And so over the coming days, Ruth kept going back out into the fields to collect the grain, and she spent more time with Boaz. And one day, Boaz asked Ruth if she would marry him. And so Boaz and Ruth and Naomi all lived together. And Boaz looked after them and took them in to be his family. And Ruth and Naomi were never hungry ever again. So I want us to have a little bit of a think about this story and think about what it would have felt like for Naomi when she had to leave Moab and she had to make that big change and go back to live in her hometown where she didn't know anybody anymore. And I wonder what it would have felt like for Ruth to leave all of her family behind and make a decision to go and be with Naomi. These were big changes for Naomi and Ruth. I wonder if you've had any big changes in your life and what that felt like. I wonder who Naomi and Ruth looked to comfort them during this time. Naomi and Ruth both knew God as their friend, and they knew that he would look after them. God made Naomi and he made Ruth to show love in the same way that he does, so he knew that they were showing his love when they cared for each other. We can look to God to take care of us when things in our life change and they feel a bit different. We can also look to each other to help each other when we're struggling if something has changed in our life. God made all of us to show love to each other, and choosing to help each other means that we are showing love. Change can feel really scary, and that's okay because it's different, and when things are different we can feel unsure. But with God's superpower and God's promise and with God's love and with the kindness that people show us in the world, we know that we will be just fine.